Hello, my name is Joanna Cichon, and I will be discussing digestion and the regulation of the gastric phase in this video. I just want to mention that I tried recording this video earlier with the presentation going on in the background of me talking with like a double screen, but it didn't save. So I have my presentation here and I'm going to link it down below so that you can watch it at the same time. But getting right into it, the stomach has three main functions. The first is storage, the second is digestion, and the third is defense. And these occur as food enters from the esophagus into the stomach, and that food stimulates the gastric lumen and initiates short reflexes. And these are what make up the gastric phase of digestion, these short reflexes. They are stimulated specifically by the presence of peptides and amino acids and by the distension of the stomach. Because food is present, the food is stretching out the stomach. And so going into the first topic, the storage of food. Receptive relaxation is a neurally mediated reflex, which means the receptive relaxation is the stomach expanding and relaxing in order to hold food. So food is stored and held up in the upper part of the stomach. There isn't much movement there. It's considered pretty quiet, and it stays there until it has to move down into the lower section of the stomach, which is considerably more active. There are peristaltic waves down there that push and mix the food together, and this food is mixed together with some acid and digestive enzymes. These create chyme, and chyme is relatively uniform. It is slowly secreted through the pylorus into the duodenum and into the small intestine, and it's done so slowly so that there isn't like a rush of this chyme going down there, so that the small intestine has some time to absorb all of those nutrients that are coming in. And next up we have digestion. So the stomach is lined with mucus, and it contains some gastric pits, in which are some gastric glands that secrete various hormones, enzymes, paracrine signals. And I'm just going to go through a few of these like hormones, enzymes, and things that can be found in there. So first up we have some G cells. G cells mainly secrete gastrin into the blood. Gastrin is released when the stomach stretches or when peptides and amino acids are present. So when food is down there, it acts directly on parietal cells, and the G cells act indirectly on histamine. And just overall, it promotes acid release in the stomach. Moving on to some parietal cells, they secrete gastric or hydrochloric acid that plays a key role in digestion, and it does so by regulating or releasing and activating pepsin, which is in charge of denaturing proteins, breaking them down. It triggers D cells and their release of somatostatin. It inactivates some salivary amylase, which stops carbohydrate breakdown, or salivary amylase is in charge of the carbohydrate breakdown, so it's inactivating that, and it protects the body from pathogens. It's so acidic that bacteria and microorganisms will just like die in the acid environment. Secretion of hydrochloric acid is maintained by the hydrogen potassium ATPase. So hydrogen is exiting the cell and it's going into the lumen of the stomach, whereas potassium is going from the lumen into the cell through this channel. And there is some chloride that follows the concentration gradient made by the hydrogen, so it follows it out into the lumen so that the hydrogen and the chloride are out there and they create this hydrochloric acid. And of course, with acid secretion, there has to be something buffering it so that there isn't too much, that there isn't an overwhelm. And bicarbonate is used as the buffer in the blood that is being secreted from the stomach. So the blood exiting the stomach has some bicarbonate in it just to buffer it so that it's not as acidic. And continuing on to some chief cells. Chief cells secrete the inactive pepsinogen, which is an inactive enzyme. And in the presence of acid, the acidic nature of the stomach, it will lead to pepsin, which will break down proteins and meats. Gastric lipase is secreted with pepsin, but it is breaking down triglycerides. It breaks down some of the triglycerides, not all by any means. And next up, we have enterochromaffin-like cells. These are secreting histamine in response to acetylcholine stimulation. And as I mentioned briefly before, the histamine helps with the production of acid, and it does so by combining with H2 receptors on parietal cells. Then we have some D cells. They secrete somatostatin, which is also known as growth hormone inhibiting hormone. This helps to blunt some acid secretion by decreasing gastrin and histamine, and it also plays a key role in stopping pepsinogen secretion. And lastly, we have intrinsic factor, which is secreted by parietal cells, and it is incredibly crucial for the absorption of B12. Now we go into defense. So defense can be done. I'll break this up into some mucus cells, which can be found in the luminal surface and in the neck of those gastric glands, those pits that I mentioned earlier. And the mucus cells secrete mucus, which is used as the physical barrier, and it also secretes some bicarbonate, which acts as the buffer barrier. The mucus acts as a barrier because it has a pH of around 7, whereas the hydrochloric acid in the stomach has a pH of around 2, so it's extremely acidic. It could be damaging to the walls of the stomach if there wasn't that barrier. So both of these things actually, when they work together and they're in the correct amounts, the acid and the mucus, they defend the body from pathogens. So the acid is still killing off some bacteria, the pathogens, microorganisms that don't belong there. And the mucus is protecting the lumen, the surface of the stomach. So alterations in either of these could lead to some injuries in the stomach. Increased acid or decreased mucus secretion can create some ulcers, which may lead to some bleeding and increased risk for infections, and definitely a lot of pain. And just kind of circling back out of all of this, circling back to the regulatory processes of the gastric phase, I just want to stress that short reflexes are in control. So short reflexes, just by definition, are local integration of sensory input. They don't have to travel very far distances. And like I said before, the short reflexes are initiated by the distension of the stomach, the peptides, and presence of amino acids. This presence and those things lead to the enteric plexus recognition, and postganglionic parasympathetic and intrinsic enteric neuron action, which is the secretion of those hormones, those enzymes, the paracrine signals that I mentioned, those G cells, the parietal cells, all of those things. And this all plays a role with the stomach motility. It induces the stomach motility, it starts the movement, and the contents of the stomach are broken down and eventually end up in the small intestine. So if you are looking at my PowerPoint, I have the assignment slide up next. I have a few questions here, and the answers are just in red. Those are the correct answers. I explain everything in those, and I will include a few more questions in like a separate link. Not all of the questions are present on the slide. And lastly, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. And I have more sources for the pictures and for the information that I used on these slides listed last. So thank you for watching.